Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And, lately we've been covering The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I think by the time you hear this, we've already wrapped up. Maybe by the time you hear this, we're covering Loki. We've also covered WandaVision, The Mandalorian, so lots of extra bonus content on there for as little as $1 a month. And I want to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Belga, Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. I've got a familiar voice on the show, though. It's been a minute, but I've got Scott with Squadcast Media on the podcast. Say hi, Scott.
Hi, Scott. It's been too long, Lisa. I mean,
I know
you've been like a busy woman with all these people and all these movies. I know.
I've been busy. I think you've been busy. You're like the busiest podcaster I know.
Oh, what can I say? People apparently think I'm fun to listen to. I don't know.
I would agree with that.
You asked me to be back on the show. I mean, that's your own fault.
I did. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad to have you back. You've been on the show a few times. We've talked several movies, so people should go back and listen to those episodes, obviously. But if this is the first time they're hearing you on the show, can you introduce yourself just a little bit?
Of course. So my name is Scott, and I am the co-founder of Squadcast Media Network and the co-host of the I guess you could say the flagship show of the network, which is DC Film Squadcast, where my co-host Tim and I talk about DC film and television news. And we've been doing this for it'll be 6 years this September.
Whoa, that's crazy!
I know, right? So we've had a busy 2020, early 2021, and now we're kind of into this like easy period now where it's like it's not quite as crazy. We'll just say that Zack Snyder's Justice League was kind of a big thing for us, and so
I can imagine that.
So now that that's wrapped up and Army of the Dead is wrapped up, now it's kind of like, oh, okay, now where it's like, okay, do we have news to talk about this week? No? Let's talk about a movie. That's fine, because we even just recorded an episode wrapping up our Lord of the Rings discussion where we get to talk about Return of the King, so that was lots of fun.
Nice. Fun. Yeah, I thought about that during the pandemic, like what are they going to cover when there's no new movies? That can be a challenge, so that makes sense. So my guest always picks the movie. You know, people always say, like, if you talk about this movie, it's like, no, you choose the movie. So what movie did you choose to talk about today?
Oh, and I've been teasing that we were going to be talking about this forever.
You have.
But we are talking about 1984's cult classic. I think it's fair to call it a cult classic.
I think so.
The Last Starfighter.
Yes. So this came out in 1984, 1 year after I was born. So
I did not see this in theaters.
I didn't.
I was 2.
I did not either. So, okay. Well, let me say before we dive in too much, if you guys haven't heard the show before, it is not spoiler free. We will talk spoilers. I always recommend that you go watch the movie first and then come back. If you're still listening, I'm going to read the synopsis really quick, and then we'll kind of dive into your history with the film and some facts about it. So here we go. After finally achieving the high score on Starfighter, his favorite arcade game, everyday teenager Alex Rogan meets the game designer Centauri, who reveals that he created the Starfighter as a training ground for developing and recruiting actual pilots to help fight in a war in space. Whisked away from the banality of his trailer park life to a distant alien planet, Alex struggles to use his video game playing skills to pilot a real ship with real lives at stake.
That's a fairly accurate synopsis. I like it.
Can I admit something kind of embarrassing about this movie?
Go right ahead.
Okay, I know that I watched this growing up, and when you mentioned it, I was like, oh good, I can watch this again, because I described this as the movie where I remembered up until he is playing that video game, and then the rest of it was like a blank slate. Like, I could not remember what the rest of the movie was about at all.
Okay.
And it's one of those things that it was driving me crazy, because it's like, I know I saw it a bunch of times. Why is that? You know, I was like, a part of me was worried I was going to turn the film on and then black out at the same moment or something. There was something to that. But that didn't happen. I watched it all the way through, and I even texted my childhood friend, Sandy, and I said, okay, I'm watching The Last Starfighter, and when I see this, when I even just see a picture of the, you know, poster or something, I think of your brother. And she was like, yeah, because we watched that like 100 times. She's like, my whole family loves that movie, and my brother quotes it to this day. I was like, okay, cool. My memory was good on that part, at least. But yeah, that's my experience with this movie. I'm glad that I saw it all the way through again, so I could fill in those gaps and enjoy it in its entirety. What is your experience with this film?
Okay. That is so funny that that's your experience, because this is one of those movies that I remember I would see it up to a point. Like, I have these memories of constantly starting the movie, but never finishing the movie.
That's so weird. What is that about? That's so strange.
Well, I think you got to think about, like, because we're only about 2 years apart. So you've got to think about back in the day, like, it was like coming on randomly on TV, or maybe somebody had a VHS, and if you couldn't sit down and watch the whole movie, you know, there's tons of those movies that you're like, the first 30 minutes I can quote verbatim, and then after a certain point it's like, what happens? Like, I don't think I've actually ever finished this movie. And so
maybe we were too little to like really get it.
I don't know,
you know,
but I remember then the Holy Grail, which is, that will come into play later on in our discussion of this movie, is the fact that I would check the newspaper. You know, I didn't have TV Guide, but I had the TV schedule in the local newspaper, and we had a syndicated channel that would do late night movies, like starting at about like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I remember one day, random, this is probably like early 90s, I saw they were finally showing The Last Starfighter, and I did that thing that our generation was really good at, which is we knew how to program the VCR. And I programmed the VCR to record the late night movie so that the next morning I could wake up, rewind the tape, and I finally got to watch the movie start to finish.
Maybe that's what it is. Like, there were a lot of science fiction films I watched at this friend's house. And this one, I always just reminded me of her brother because he loved video games. And I don't know. It just reminded me of them. And so, yeah, I never saw it all the way through. And even like last night we sat down to watch it, and my husband I start playing it, and he goes, I've never seen this. And I was like, what? Yeah, you have, remember? Like, and he was like, I've never seen this before. I think I thought you were talking about The Flight of the Navigator this whole time. And it's like, it's weird. I think because it has that cult status that, like, not everyone's seen it, or they haven't seen it as often as some of the other, like, classic 80s films.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those movies, because of its cult status, that if you've seen it, by God, you can quote the thing.
True.
We can hum that theme from the score. Dun 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 dun. You know, it's classic, like, 80s John Williams-esque. We're gonna have a big bombastic theme, and it's so weird because I think I think the last time I was on the show, we talked about The Wizard.
Yes, I was gonna mention that too. You keep picking these films that are about video games.
You know what?
You're on a kick.
I didn't even think about that when I picked The Last Starfighter, because I've made it known that whenever I show up on your show, I love so many different kinds of movies that I always try to make sure that I'm picking something, you know, different. Like, I intentionally
Yeah.
choose a different genre every time I come on the show. And as I'm watching it, I sit there going, "Oh, you're kidding me. I actually picked two video game movies in a row. This is funny. I can't believe I actually did this." Because I wasn't thinking about this as a video game movie. I was just thinking about
Yeah,
this
I could see
as
that.
this classic sci-fi movie, because that's always what I think about it. And it's just so funny that, The Wizard was the last movie I talked about, and I was like, "Oh, dude, this is ridiculous. Scott's showing his age." Because, I mean, look at that arcade cabinet outside that trailer
Yes.
park. I've played an arcade cabinet outside, like some diner not inside, like outdoors, and like the eating area. It's like I've totally done that, and I think this movie has that cult status because this is one of those classic 80s wish fulfillment movies.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I had a couple of quick facts about the movie too. The first one was that, according to the screenwriter, the idea for the movie came about because he wandered into a video game arcade and saw a young boy playing a video game. And he had read the book, The Once and Future King, and it occurred to him, like, what if a video game had, like, sort of a sword in the stone, and a boy sort of plot to it, which kind of led to this film. Which makes a lot of sense, especially it's the 80s, and like you said, you have that experience of, like, playing an arcade game at a place that, I think people nowadays wouldn't necessarily associate with video games because we all have them on our phones now and like home consoles, but you had to play them at either an arcade or a restaurant or something would just have a couple of arcades or a couple of what do you call them?
Cabinets.
Man, cabinets. Thank you, cabinets. Just set up with just random games.
And I love that factoid because the entire time I was watching the movie, I was like, this is like the Joseph Campbellian monomyth, but in space. I'm seeing, like,
Yeah.
it's Star Wars, it's King Arthur. I mean, I'm sorry, Centauri even calls it the Excalibur test. I mean,
True.
the screenwriter wasn't trying to hide it too terribly much.
No, and I mean, this is like pretty not right after, but around the same time as, Star Wars came out, the first one in 77. And it's like this is almost like marrying the two ideas, like marrying the two ideas of, like, video games. Video games are becoming really popular, and then also Star Wars, and this kind of has both those things in it. I could see why, this would be so appealing to kids during that time, even though I saw it a little bit later. And another thing that I liked about it is that I read that an earlier draft of the script that this took place in the suburbs, which, every movie did at this time, right?
Yeah.
I think they were trying not to have it be like E.T. and all the other movies. They're always like in the suburbs, and this takes place in a trailer park, which, I lived in a trailer park for the first few years of my life, so I can kind of relate to it. But I think that also gives a different spin on this movie because the main character is really, he's stuck in his life, and he doesn't have the same opportunities as a lot of the other heroes that we're used to seeing in these kind of movies has. And this is really his, like, get out of, his hometown opportunity. Like, he doesn't have a lot of opportunities. And it also makes the little town more close-knit because that's kind of how, like, a lot of trailer park communities are. They're, like, a little more invested in their neighbors and they're a little closer, so it kind of adds to that too. But I don't know, I just like that. I think that's a little bit different from some of the other movies, and I like that difference about it.
Well, it feels more like if the screenwriter was going for that sort of King Arthur feel, and I mean, doesn't this just like,
Oh, that's
I
true.
mean, it's got to be the fish out
This
of water. Like
Squire or
the point is
whatever.
that
Yeah.
he's dreaming big. He
Yes, yeah.
There's something about dreaming big in the suburbs that you could almost say, dude, you know, suck it up.
He's probably got rich parents and they can, like in 80s movies, they always had like huge houses. And when they were stressed about stuff, I'm like, look at their house, it's huge.
I know.
What are they so stressed about? They have tons of opportunities. But I mean, it's the movies. It doesn't necessarily reflect reality. But at least in this case, you're like, he really is kind of starting humbly.
And it's also the fact that what does he want to do? He just wants to be able to go to school. He wants to be able to get
Yeah.
out. He doesn't want to go to city college. Probably wants to go to like a university. And his big deal is he
Right.
needs a loan. And and that's that great thing of like what kicks off the things the loan gets denied, and he just sees himself being stuck. And I feel like
Yeah.
this blue collar environment. There was even a great essay. Right before we decided to do this movie, Arrow Films Video came out with this great remastered special edition Blu-ray of The Last Starfighter. They're kind of the Criterion collection for cult films and genre films. And there was an essay about blue collar workers and the American dream or something. And I don't think this film has the character that it has if it's not set in the trailer park.
I agree with you. And I think it's a little more relatable for most people than maybe the life that some of the other characters have in other movies. I think this is like a relatable story. You can imagine that a lot of people watching this, felt like this character, and it's an interesting spin because he's like a little bit older. He's like about to go to college, whereas a lot of times I feel like the main character's like a little younger. So his problems are more like real world and like truly understandable from people his age and then people older than him too.
Yeah, because he can see all. Because notice how all the neighbors, except for his girlfriend and his little brother, uh, all of his neighbors, like Otis or Granny or or his mom, they're all older. And so I feel like what it really does is it sets up this idea of, if I don't get out of here now,
I'm gonna be stuck
I will
here.
be
Yeah.
stuck here for the rest of my life. And I feel like casting everyone else is more kind of over the hill as far as characters go. You don't see a lot of other younger people in the trailer park itself. I really
Yeah.
think almost psychologically for the audience, it gives you the sense of, once I'm here, I'm never getting out.
Well, it's painful too because his friends can all go to the beach and have fun, but his mother, to support them, she has to work like two jobs and or double shifts, and so he's taking on that like parent role that he shouldn't really have to take yet. And it really is holding him back from even just having like friends and a girlfriend. I mean, he's like pretty stuck, and I think that's a very like everyone can empathize with that. Sometimes movies like this, as you get older, you're like, oh, these are like teenager problems. But I feel like, if you're an adult now, you're even more empathetic. Like, yeah, that's a rough time in your life when you're trying to figure out like what you're going to do, how you're going to either get out of your situation or improve it. Like, very relatable stuff, I think.
And I was also, and I mean, we're not even jumping into the plot yet, but since we're on this thread, Alex is kind of found himself as sort of the handyman of the trailer park. Like when
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's true.
and I I'll be honest, and I guess maybe a question for you is like, do trailer parks have like managers or landlords, or like I was kind of curious how Alex just such a good guy that he's just willing to sacrifice his time to like every time someone had a problem.
I think so, because typically how it works, and it's worse than it used to be, but like you own the trailer, but you don't own the land that it's on. You pay the person owns the land, and typically they don't have anything to do with the maintenance of your home. So I think all these people they're already not doing well financially, and so when things break, they probably can't afford to pay for someone to come fix it, and so Alex is stepping in and just out of the goodness of his heart fixing it because he's saving them money by doing that.
And that also makes Alex so much more of a selfless hero, and
Yes,
also
yeah, absolutely.
makes his situation so dire might be hyperbolic, but like the fact that he can't go to Silver Lake with his girlfriend and his friends just for a fun day to blow off some steam because my power's out, my
Yeah.
toilet's clogged, and you hear it because they have all the voice of everyone going Alex, 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 and then it goes dark, and then all you hear is everyone going thank you, and like you're just like, oh, you're such a nice guy, but jeez, man, could you take a day off? And it
Yeah.
really makes you empathize with Alex as a character.
Yeah, because I think, and that was another thing I liked about the movie is that you really like Alex. He seems very like earnest and honest. He's not like cocky. He's very, just a good guy. And yeah, I think they're just trying to show there that he's a good guy.
But he's
The last thing
also
that I wanted,
but
oh, go
but
ahead.
he's also not overly goody two shoes or nice.
Oh, no,
Like
no,
he's
no. I think he's like a
resentful.
normal teen.
Yeah, he is the
Yeah,
norm.
he's angry and he has a right to be. Like, it's a really frustrating situation
Like
for
it
sure.
sucks, and he's not like a Tiny Tim. Oh, it's okay. No, he's like, no, this sucks. Like
Tiny Tim.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah, he's noticing that all his peers cannot relate to him. Like they have the freedom to like go do the things they want to do. They have more opportunities than he does, and so he's very frustrated that he's so behind. The last thing that I had too was that they keep mentioning this video game in the movie, and they were working on it, but it never came to be that I know of. Is that right?
I believe so. And there's even I unfortunately we were talking about this before we started recording. There are some great special features on this Arrow release, and there's actually a special feature all about creating the game for the
Oh
movie,
wow.
and I can't wait to watch that and check it out. Uh, because, well, granted, in the '80s, that looked like a game I'd want to play. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like a flight simulator, which, I think around the time of this film, of course, again, I was very little, but I remember like even when I was younger, like hearing about flight simulators and people being very interested in that because of the capabilities that they could have that previous, Pixel games didn't have that many options to it to where it could simulate a flight. So like that would be really appealing, I think, around that time. Like, oh wow, this is like very advanced, video game stuff.
yeah, and then by the time I was watching this movie, the big flight simulator back in the '90s was X-wing, and so you're watching these movies, and it's like the best thing about this movie is that yes, it's got that video game aspect to it, but it also has like that dogfighter, Top Gun kind of, you know,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
and so that's actually for me that was more the appeal to the Last Starfighter was the pilot dogfight aspect. And I think it's interesting that you brought up the Star Wars connection because when he like you immediately get to like the mission briefing like is what you get like at the end of Star Wars when Luke's finding out about the Death Star and everyone's getting their orders. It's like, oh no, we're gonna put that in the first like 20 minutes of the movie. Like,
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say it's like they took the most exciting parts and put it in there for sure.
so yeah, and I think this film also I don't know the actual history behind it, but I believe if it's not the first, it's one of the first to use completely 3D CGI in a movie. Like those scenes are entirely computer generated using completely rendered, for the time 3D graphics. And so there were no models.
Yeah.
It was all CGI as far as 1984 CGI is concerned, which I think when I was a kid was part of the appeal to it because it looked video gamey and
Yeah, I was gonna say like they can kind of fall back on the like if you think if you think the effects are dated, well, this is based on, in the movie, a video game, so that kind of gives it that full circle connection.
Yeah. So I think this all kind of, I think what we just spent all this time talking about really talks about why this movie appeals. Like, if you've seen this
Yeah,
movie, I don't know too many people who have seen this movie who don't enjoy this movie.
I agree. I agree. I feel like it's one of those films. If you saw it growing up, you really loved it. And you kind of like the fact that not everyone's seen it. It's like a little secret, like a little secret gem.
Or it's not even like you don't even want to keep it secret. You feel like it's a movie you get to like, oh, I get to share this with you now because
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
so much fun,
That's
and
true.
it's got that '80s charm to it. You know.
It does. Absolutely. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of your favorite scenes in the movie?
I do. I have to laugh and I have to cringe and laugh about the little brother because that is such an
Oh,
'80s that is such an '80s character. The smart
for
the
sure.
smart alecky, uh, you know, older than he should be little brother who cusses because it's a PG movie in the '80s, and man, the language you could get away with in a PG movie back in the '80s.
Oh my gosh, anything. Anything.
and and the fact that he's got a stack of Playboy, and it's just, I his character could so easily be annoying, and yet I am entertained by the little brother, and I can't explain it.
He's cute, and I don't know, and he, yeah, I think he does just enough to where he reminds you of a little brother, but he's not too much. But I think the scenes, like I read that they added scenes with the beta unit or whatever, the simuloid, is that what he calls
Well,
them?
yeah, he's a beta unit, yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, the
beta unit,
robot, the
and
robot
he,
imposter.
yeah, the robot, yeah. They added some more like funny stuff with the robot and the little brother because the audience really responded to that. I think that kid's just cute, and so it was like, yes, more of this. And I think it adds another level to the movie because I agree with you. It's like a very '80s trope to have like that little brother. So it's like, it's weird. It's like a little bit ET, a little bit Star Wars, a little bit, a lot of different films. And I think it almost, in some ways, the whole movie feels like a love letter to all the other films of that era.
Yes, and I think that's why it works so well because it's kind of a pastiche, and it takes all your favorite things and puts it in a blender.
Pretty much, yeah.
I have to admit, as a kid, the scene where Alex actually beats the game, you know what, I still kind of get a little worked up. I mean,
It's exciting.
it is very exciting. Credit to the film for making you watching a teenage boy play a video game and you actually get emotionally invested. We kind of dealt with that in The Wizard, like when we were
Hmm.
watching the little brother play Super Mario Brothers 3 at the end.
Yeah.
And I feel like this one, I think it also helps because Otis Otis is excited for him because he's had a bad day.
Yes.
And then Otis
Yeah.
gets excited and then literally calls everyone in the trailer park. And it's like the biggest thing to happen at the trailer park where everyone leaves to watch him play this video game. And it's such an interesting moment because as an audience member, especially as a kid, it gets you more excited about the fact that Alex is beating this video game. But then as an adult, you're also realizing, wow, this is the best thing you guys have got to do tonight. Is like
That's a good
it's
point.
like even the three guys playing poker are like, take your hands. It's like we're gonna stop the poker game to go watch Alex beat a video game. Like that's the most excitement they've seen in a long time. And I think it just reinforces the environment. Like this is something that like they think this is an amazing achievement and it must be celebrated.
Yeah, and I also think it sort of cements the idea that yes, Alex wants to get out of there and he wants to move on to other things, but he is truly appreciated. He is a little hero in this town for a few reasons, for the fixing stuff up and things like this. They're supportive of him. And I think showing this character to be somebody that's, someone other people get behind and support and look to, sets him up to be this, hero that he's going to become later on of the universe, I guess.
Yeah, it's also
Yeah.
it's also a great way of showing what that really is a charming community.
Yeah, yeah.
It just
I agree.
yeah. So I love that scene. I'm not even going to talk about a scene. I'm going to talk about an actor. There's another reason I absolutely adored this film, and it's because of Robert Preston. I love he plays Centauri. This was actually his final film role. He passed
Yeah.
away shortly after this movie came out. So this was the last movie Robert Preston ever did.
He was too young to die. That's so sad.
He, of course, I had by that point, I had fallen in love with him because, of course, he is well known for playing Harold Hill in The Music Man, and that
Mm-hmm.
movie made a big impression on me as a child. And I've seen other movies he's done, particularly Victor Victoria with Julie Andrews, but he was such an incredible showman that he he's kind of Harold Hill, the con man, but he's an alien. And it seems like it was typecasting to put Robert Preston in this role, and I didn't care because the man oozes charm and charisma, and no one can deny it. Like, you just love Robert Preston. Like, he can be conning you, he can be lying to you, he could be flim flamming you, and you don't care because he just does it with style.
Well, and I feel like this is another sort of like 80s trope where this character feels very like of that time. Like I almost wonder like if a younger person watches this movie, are they like, what is up with Centauri? Like I feel like it's definitely, like that character would be different now, but I love how he is because it just reminds you this is 1984.
Well, and also, if we go back to the fact that once again, I'm so glad you bring up the fact that the screenwriter had just read The Once and Future King, because he's Merlin. That's his
Yeah.
role in the monomyth. Like,
Oh, that's true.
he's the wily, he's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's Merlin. He is he's the old, knowing, wiser character who ushers our hero into the new world. Like, who
Yeah.
puts him on his path of his adventure. And that's, I mean, and so he's playing this archetype, but because he's older, he's wily. Like, do I trust him? Like, he is that wizard, especially since he invents the game. It's like he's the one who put the sword in the stone, as it were. And so
Yeah.
I just love it because it fits into that Arthurian model that obviously the screenwriter was going for.
I agree, and I also feel like, there's definitely, he has this monetary motive the whole movie, but I think he's like one of those characters where that's what he puts out there, but he's got a big heart underneath, and I think you get to see that like towards the end of the movie. But I kind of like that duality with him where it's like sometimes you're like, okay, he's all about selling them this kid because it has to work because he needs the money, but then you also later feel like, no, I think he really cared about him and saw his potential. He did design that game and he beat it, so he knows that he can do it, and I like that about him. And yeah, he was charming. I did not watch those two things you mentioned, so to me he reminded me of Columbo.
No, oh no, Peter Falk, absolutely. You are dead on. I mean, that those two actors have a way about them that I could totally yes, do not feel bad about that. Robert Preston, Peter
Well,
Falk, I'm down with that comparison.
Well, especially since we talked about Murder by Death last week, and I was telling my guest that Travis that I watched a lot of Columbo growing up, which is kind of weird because I was kind of like too little for that. But my dad watched it a lot, so I would tell my dad like I like Columbo, and he'd be like, really? Okay, well, we can watch that. So maybe that's why I watch so many detective things. I don't know.
Don't worry, I was watching Matlock at the same time. It's okay. It's
Yeah, it's like you end up watching what your parents like, and it's just interesting what you end up getting exposed to. But yeah, so when I see him, it makes me kind of nostalgic. I'm like, this is kind of like yeah, he's a con man, but he also sort of is dressed like a PI, so there's a little bit of crossover there. Yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. I was guessing that you were about to talk about him.
yeah. Well, and you know what? There's another actor that I did not connect. It's one of those. I'm almost 40, and I connect the dots now that it's taken me this long to connect the dots. But the character of Greg, his navigator, do you know who that actor is?
I don't. I see his name. I'm kind of clicking through, which I'll edit out my clicks so everyone doesn't have to hear them. But I'm clicking through some pictures. I do not think I know who this is.
He's the old man from RoboCop.
Oh, I kind of like when I was watching it towards the end, I thought this is someone kind of important. Like I kind of realized that towards the end of the movie, and I did wonder like who's under there.
I was sitting there going, because I just got finished over at Squadcast Media for our Patreon rewatching the RoboCop trilogy, and so I was sitting there listening to Greg, and I'm like, dang, I know this voice. Who is this guy? And so while the movie was playing, I looked up IMDb, and I went, old man. He's the old man. He's OCP. Oh my goodness! Like the dots suddenly, like all the synapses fired. I was like, I cannot believe it took me until today. I am today old when I made that connection of who Greg is, because it's just that makeup is actually really good makeup for 1984.
I agree. And I think he, not only that, but he acts in it very well. And I like his personality because it's like, I don't know, especially at the end when he's like greeting everyone and being so warm, you kind of, I don't know, there was something cute about that. Like they're kind of scared. He looks like a monster and he goes, oh, monster. And he goes down there and like shakes everyone's hand. And the second that he shakes their hand and addresses them, all their demeanor changes. They like automatically accept him. And also because Alex okayed him.
Yes, exactly.
And I just thought that was really cute, and I thought he was a very like sweet side character.
I think one of my scenes I love with him in particular is really the entire time they're in the Gunstar. Like one, as soon as they launch, and he's like, and Alex is like, so how many starfighters are there, including you? Yeah. One. and
I love that.
and from then on, you've got like it's all right, I'll have it all figured out before we get to the frontier. What's that? The frontier. It's like he had these. I mean, he had these great one-liners, but then you also got that sweet scene where he pulls out basically the equivalent of the fold out pictures from your wallet, and like showing his showing his family, and getting that personal connection, because he's been so this over the top kind of character that's been like pushing Alex to be the best starfighter he can be, and that's kind of the moment where you finally get a glimpse of him as a character, and it really does solidify their bond. Especially since this is such a weird type of dogfight movie where Alex is literally just the gunner. Like,
true, yeah.
Greg is the one flying. Alex's entire job is just to shoot.
True. I agree. And I also like in the movie that Alex has that he does something very, very realistic that I feel like you don't see in a lot of these kinds of films, where he's like, yeah, I'm not doing this. Goodbye. And they like bring him all the way back home, and he's like, I'm just a kid in a trailer park. And Centauri says, if that's what you think you are, then that's all you're ever going to be. And I was like, dang, that's rough. That's tough love. And he's like, ring this if you want to come back. And I was like, man, this Starfighter gig is the best chance he's got. I think he should go back up there. But I like that he has that, time for him to like not think he doesn't want to do it. I like that they give the character that Because a lot of times in movies you're like, well, how did they get there so fast? How did they just accept all of this so quickly? So I kind of like that about it.
Oh, absolutely. And kudos to the screenwriter, because that's part of that kind of monomyth too. Is like there is actually a. I'm sorry, I keep on referencing it, but I just read The Hero with a Thousand Faces like 3 weeks ago, and it was just like seeing my mind going, this is so brilliantly written, because he literally followed the steps, and one of the steps is denying the call. And that's what Alex does. He denies the call. He says, "Nope, I'm not doing this. No."
That's true. That's true. Yeah. And I mean, it also makes us as the audience like empathize with him more because in his shoes we probably would feel pretty wobbly as well. Like somebody just telling you you're good enough to do something is like, well, I don't know about this. Like it's a lot. And it makes him like more humble too because it's like, okay, he's a humble person and he's genuine. And we want that in our hero.
Well, especially with that first scene with his friends when he's checking his mail, and he kind of cops an attitude, a little bit of a superiority complex with his friends, where he's like,
Oh yeah.
"Oh, you're gonna go to city college. You're gonna polish your pickup. You're gonna get drunk and puke on Saturday nights. No, not me." Like he, that right before he can't go out with him because he has to go fix everything. So it's interesting where they gave him that moment for him to kind of inflate his ego a little bit and kind of mouth off, and then he immediately gets brought down and humbled. So it's interesting that he has this opportunity where he can be the big shot, and he's like, no, no,
Yeah.
not no, no, I'm going back home.
I think in the first scene, it's probably more him trying to save face in front of his friends. Like, maybe if he has a really good reason for not acting like that, he's not so hurt that he's not included in all these parties and stuff.
Yeah, once again, it just makes him a very nuanced character, especially for
Yeah.
a fun little '80s sci-fi romp. You know,
Yeah.
I really kudos to Lance Guest, who plays Alex Rogan, which he really didn't do a whole lot after. Like this was
Yeah, I noticed that. Looking at his IMDb, I was kind of surprised.
one of the commentary tracks on this Arrow Blu-ray release is actually him and his son talking about the movie. And I
Aw.
can't wait to watch that, because the
That's
commentaries
cute.
actually have him and his son on one track. The other track is the director, Nick Castle, which, funny story, he was Michael Myers.
Oh, yeah. That's so crazy.
I just was like, I didn't know that. I'm like,
Aren't there like three Halloween actors in this movie?
yes, there are.
Yeah.
Actually, I think because Lance Guest was also in Halloween 2.
Yes. I think that's how he was cast. Yeah.
So there's just this weird, like, if you love '80s movies, it's like this movie's for you, because it's this.
Yeah, it literally has everything. Like the girlfriend even kind of acts like the girlfriend in Back to the Future a little bit, even though that came out after this. It was just giving me those vibes.
Yeah, and I would be lying if I didn't say that 9, 10-year-old Scott didn't seriously crush on Catherine Mary Stewart, because
I actually said last night that I was like, his girlfriend is impossibly hot. Like, I don't believe that's his girlfriend. Like, she doesn't look like just someone's girlfriend. I don't know. She was like too pretty for this film.
oh yeah, but she also did a really good job of just playing the girl next door.
Oh, for sure. Personality wise, yeah, she was definitely. I think she did a good job in the movie of like. I mean, she does have some of those like 80s like screaming moments and like, what's going on? What? Like, I feel like that's what like girlfriends do in these movies, but I also feel like she takes it upon herself to like go get Alex. She gets on board really quickly. She's very supportive. I think she gets to do a little more than the girlfriend in Back to the Future. So I was pleased with her character, and I thought she did a really good job.
I was curious because I was going to ask you how you felt about Mags as a. She does get relegated to the girlfriend role and the supporting role, but I felt like she was sassy enough and spunky enough that it wasn't quite as cookie cutter as it could have been. I mean, I'm not saying it's
I'm
great, but I'm saying it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't get like thrown behind a trash can and we don't see her the rest of the movie or whatever, like in Back to the Future too. So I think, for the time, this is definitely she is a little tropish, but I felt like she did a lot in the film, and she's in the film throughout. And I liked when she finds out who Beta is, which some of the Beta scenes too, I was like, oh, how would that play today? People get like really upset about this today, and it would makes my brain hurt to try to think about how it would be interpreted. But when she finds out who Beta is, she's like all on board and like, okay, like I'm concerned about Alex. Let's go find him and let's help him. So I thought that was kind of cool that she was so open-minded, and then of course, in the end she goes with him to space. That too I liked, because normally I feel like she would have stayed behind, but I think she was like truly ready to try something new, and she trusted him. And I don't know, I thought that was sweet. I found that ending with their relationship to be really cute.
Good. I felt the same way. I was just hoping you felt the same way too.
Yeah, you're hoping I wouldn't rip her apart. I couldn't. It's 1984. Like, today would her character be different? Yes, but I don't think it was bad.
Good. Okay. Other favorite scenes. I mean, really, the problem then is that to talk about favorite scene is just how can I not just talk about the giant space battle at the end? Like,
True.
the one lone. I mean, the movie's called The Last Starfighter, so it's one ship against the entire, Kodan Armada, and it. And at the time when I watched it, seeing that being done, because it's CG, granted, early 80s CG, but that still allowed for movement and scenes that, I'm sorry, the dogfights in Star Wars don't look like that because you couldn't get models to move like that at the time. So it was a cool design. Like, he was shooting lasers and missiles. And you have the Death Blossom scene where it's like it goes.
Oh yeah, I like how he's like, that hasn't been tested. I'm like, oh man, risky, hasn't been tested.
Yeah, I know.
You gotta love it.
Prototype. And then and of course the gunner chair becomes like those inertia rides you get like at space centers where you're like being spun all around.
I was like, he looked nauseous, like spinning all over the place, shooting everyone. But hey, he was prepared. He trained for this.
Yes, exactly. And in his wombat bag, I used to shoot wombats in my land speeder back home.
Exactly.
But those are really kind of the scenes that really stand out to me. And notice, and I think it's because it's not even the scenes; it's just the characters. And I think
I
that's
agree.
what makes
It's very character driven.
It's very character driven, and the relationships between the characters, I think, is what makes this movie stand out. Like, how does this movie make it out of 1984? To where people still fondly remember it. Like when I posted it on the Facebook group, and everyone just remembers. Greetings, Starfighter. You've been recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Zura and the Kodan Armada. It's like, we just know that.
Yeah.
And
I forgot to mention. Oh,
no, go ahead.
I forgot to mention with the girlfriend too. I liked when we were talking about like things that are like relatable or maybe more empathetic. When he can't go with her to the beach, and he's really hurt by that, and she decides to skip a party that everyone's going to just to see him, and then he gets a little bit jealous, like, you came home with so and so, and she's like, well, I wanted to be with you. I liked that whole like exchange between them, and then he like really softens, and I just thought, yeah, like, she's so understanding for a teenager. Because when I think back of myself as a teenager, would I have been like that? Would I have been able to see what was really going on with Alex, or would I have just been mad he didn't go to the beach with me? I thought that was cool that their relationship seemed mature for teenagers.
Yes, very much.
I thought that was cute.
Yes. and like you said, I liked the idea that they added more scenes with Beta and the little brother because they're
I
funny.
liked Beta.
They are legit funny. I think they're charming. I like the my favorite one is when the Beta unit takes his head off and puts it on the desk, and it's so obviously that they built the set so that Lance Guest is sticking his head up out of a hole in the desk, but
How silly it looks is like part of why it's funny. Yeah.
yes. Oh, my favorite part is when he sees the assassin ship land and he just goes, "Oh no!" and the hands actually make him so he could shake his head. I just thought that was, I don't know. It's goofy and I love it because it's goofy.
I mean, it's definitely aimed at like a younger audience, and it would be perfect for that audience. And since we were young when we saw it, it was pretty perfect. Yeah, I like that. I also like just in the end like how accepting the whole town is of this alien encounter. I found that to be really sweet. And then I also thought maybe that's another reason to put it in a trailer park because who's always seeing aliens?
People are trust.
Some rural people,
Yes.
some country folk. So maybe it makes sense for it to, and maybe that's why they're so accepting. Hey, maybe they've seen this before. We don't know. But I liked that. And then also that he chose to go up there and be a starfighter. And his mom was like, okay. Like just how happy everyone is for him that he's going into space and how quickly they accept it. I'm like, that's so cute. Like such an 80s sci-fi thing that would happen. Like not realistic and I'm here for
But
it.
they set it up with that scene early in the movie where they all got excited about him beating the game. It's like
True.
they've
They're in his
they're
corner.
already in his corner, and so you buy it when they're all like, they're actually like, I love Otis going, "Man, everyone's gonna know Starlight, Starbright, where Alex Rogan and Maggie left for the stars." Like it's like we're gonna be a tourist attraction because we're where the hero came from. We're the hometown where the hero came from, and it's just
Yes.
so it's so Americana and so innocent. Which once again,
Yeah.
in the early '80s, you saw a lot more in movies like that.
Yeah, because like now the way to write it would be like the mom is devastated that he's leaving, and she ends up having a drinking problem, and everything goes to crap while he's gone. And like the sad, dark, dystopian version of this, and I like this better. It's more optimistic.
Well, it was also that like while I was watching the movie, all three of my boys. So one of them is only 10 months old, so he goes where I put him. But it was fun that at one point I had all my sons in the room, and the occasional cuss word comes out. You know what they know what bad words are, and they know not to repeat them. But it was funny to see them all three, and they were all just watching it. And you gotta love a movie that like can captivate an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-month-old, and their almost
Yeah,
40-year-old father,
absolutely.
and we're all sitting there going, "We're cool."
Yeah, this is great. This is an all ages event. Yeah, that's cute. I was gonna ask you about that. Like, how do your kids feel about this movie? I was wondering. I think you might have heard this story before, where I had a friend that showed his little sisters Back to the Future, and they were like, "That was boring," and he was like, just like devastated. So I always wonder, like, how does the younger generation view some of these movies? I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, especially my 5-year-old. My 5-year-old, he's my imagination station, and so he was like,
Oh,
"Is he an alien?" And then when the battle's happening, he's like jumping up, going pew pew. He's like doing his own sound effects, and it's just it it warmed my little geek dad heart to go, "Yes, I have won."
parenting done right. Well, were there any other scenes that we hadn't talked about
No, I
yet?
really do think I think I've hit everything because, like I said, it's
Yeah.
more about the character moments. It's more about the actors playing the characters and how well, and so that just leads to those. Because it's less than 2 hours. This.
I was gonna say, it's every time I have to ask that question, I feel like it's because I'm like, oh wait, this is not a 2 hour movie, but I don't want to cut you off either, so always make sure.
No, but that's another thing is that it's also a very well paced movie. It doesn't seem
I think so.
it does because sometimes short movies can seem long
This is true.
because they drag,
because they're bad.
right, or
Yeah.
or they feel like they move too quickly,
Rushed.
right? They're
Yeah.
rushed,
Yeah.
and you need more time. This one, it's like this is what it was supposed to be, and it was structured very well to where you don't realize you're watching a less than 2 hour movie because it does
Yeah,
its
I
job.
didn't think about that. Yeah, till I looked it up later, and I was like, oh, it's less than 2 hours. I didn't even notice. Yeah. I guess that brings me to my last couple of questions then. Number one, I know you've spent this whole time explaining why you love this movie, but if you had to summarize, why do you think you keep coming back to this one?
Because it's just fun. Like that it's not deep. Actually, it's deeper if you pay attention to it. There's actually more depth to it than you can give it credit for. But on the surface, it's just a fun romp. It's great characters, it's some sci-fi action, it's got some 80s cheese to it. And yes, just like we talked about with The Wizard, is there some nostalgia associated with it? Absolutely. There's nostalgia out of its pores. But I love it. And once again, it's my childhood. Both, I was born in the 80s, and I watched this as a child. And I can go back and appreciate it for what it is and what it was trying to do. And I think it did it well. And so
Yeah.
I think it's a great example of how you can tell a good story with interesting characters and just have a fun time doing it.
I agree. You know, like I said, I hadn't seen this in a long time. So long, I forgot the plot. But I would always describe it as a movie that I liked, even though I couldn't remember it. So when I go back and watch it, I enjoyed it that much more. And definitely, as scenes popped up, memories were triggered. And like I said, I ended up texting a childhood friend. Any movie that can have me doing that is a good movie. How would you pitch this to someone that hasn't seen it before?
Have you ever wanted to be told that you're special and go out and become like the badass, hotshot pilot in the universe? This movie's for you. I mean, because that's once again, I said at the beginning of our discussion, it is pure 80s wish fulfillment. It's how would you love to be that hotshot that, you talk about like the armchair quarterback. What if you being that video game nerd, those skills actually meant something? And let's think about it. That's a plot device that should really work today. And I feel like, this walked so like Ready Player One could run. Like
Oh, absolutely. I was even going to say that it reminds me of like Stranger Things, how that's sort of just like a mishmash of all the things we loved in the 80s. Like this was that, but it was made in the 80s too.
Yeah, that is so well put. Like you hit the nail on the head, and I love it. It's also why I love Stranger Things. Like
Yeah, same.
for the same reason.
I remember people criticizing like, oh, nostalgia bomb. I'm like, everything you love is a nostalgia bomb, okay? Like there's something that preceded it and led to it, and that's part of why you like it. Also, Alex's wardrobe is just the bomb. I would dress like that now. The rolled cuffs, oversized button-ups, and bootleg cut jeans. I love them. I feel like it's in fashion now. And I kept saying the whole movie, I'm like, I want that chambray shirt. Anyway, that's just an aside for me.
But that's an interesting point. Except for maybe some hairstyles, it's not that dated.
Yeah. It's not. Like, those styles are back. So I was like, I kept saying the whole movie, like, I want that shirt. I want that shirt. And Nick was like, you're so weird. And I'm like, you know that already, so it's okay.
He married you. It's his fault.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think this is a good film if you kind of want to see, if you want to have bragging rights of another, 80s cult classic, add this one to your list. I think it's worth checking out.
Absolutely.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming back. You must come back again, hopefully sooner. I think maybe I was too like, come back whenever. I need to give you hard
You
dates
do need to
this
give me
time, so
hard
you come
dates
back.
because you know me, Lisa. I don't want your listeners to get tired of me. There was like a period where I was on here a
I
little too
don't think
much. I
that would
felt, and
happen.
now it's like, it's a
No.
breather.
Well, that's very modest of you, but I don't think that's true. I think people really appreciate when you come on. Myself included, obviously.
Well, once again, it just becomes, I'll just start going down the genre boxes and go, okay, which one have I not checked yet?
Yes, you should. That would be so fun. I'm glad that we talked about this one, though. I was really looking forward to this.
Oh, I was really looking forward to talking about it. And like I said, it gave me an opportunity, kind of like with The Wizard when I got that new Shout Factory edition for my birthday.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This gave me a excuse because I've done this now 3 times. Like when we talked about Some Like It Hot, I had just gotten the new Criterion version of that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's like you're my excuse for busting out like these special editions of movies that I've bought and going, now let me in.
Happy to enable
Oh,
you.
you are such an enabler, and I love it.
So, Scott, before you go, where can people find you?
Well, of course, you can find my main podcast, the DC Film Squadcast, wherever podcasts can be found. You can find the entire network of shows on Vero, Facebook, YouTube, and at squadcastmedia.com. I'm also kind of, putting myself out there with some other people on their channels. And so every Saturday night, you can find me talking Batman the Animated Series over on the Film Junkie YouTube channel. And pretty much on a weekly basis now, over on the Wonder Meg YouTube channel, you can see Meg and me having our own 2-person book discussion as we read Dune chapter by chapter.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming back and hope to have you back soon.
Good to be back.